Good morning. Having recorded the video content I'm about to do now once and failed to show you the images, I'm going to try again. So let's go right to the images. I'll be talking about Manet and the origins of Impressionism. Manet himself has a kind of an ambivalent relationship to Impressionism. As you will come to understand, I hope, he was profoundly influential on the origins of Impressionists and the efforts of painters that we associate with Impressionism, and he would be influenced by them in turn. However, he never exhibited with them. So if we define Impressionism institutionally to include those artists that participated in the 8 Impressionist exhibitions, then we would not include Manet. If we look at it more technically, in terms of a way of painting, a way of handling paint and a range of colors, use of bright colors applied in a sketchy, painterly manner, Manet came to be very much an Impressionist late in his career. Let's look at his early work. Here is Manet on the screen as seen in a photograph by Nadar. You can see that he's a dapper dresser, something of a man about town. He might be labeled a flaneur, one who enjoyed casually strolling about Paris, looking for motifs to paint. He was increasingly committed to the representation of modern experience, contemporary life. His early paintings are somewhat challenging and complex, as we see in this work, which is called Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe. Now, if we look at its subject, what we see here are 2 clothed men and 2 women, one absolutely naked, sitting in an odd and unexpected way next to these 2 clothed men. And then there's a woman in the background who wears a almost transparent an undergarment as she bathes in a pool of water. So the arrangement is an odd one, and to a Parisian who saw this on exhibition, it would have been provocative and even strange, morally questionable. Well, in fact, the subject is based on this work on the right-hand side by Titian, which is labeled Pastoral Symphony. This painting was in the Louvre. Manet certainly knew it, and you can see that it too presents 2 clothed men sitting amongst 2 naked women in a landscape. So in the basic contents of the 2 paintings, they're very, very, very similar. The women in the Titian are understood to be muses. Notice that the men don't look at them. The men don't engage with them. One of them holds a musical instrument, and the other holds a pitcher of water, and she's dipping it into a well, which might be understood symbolically as drawing inspiration from the well, as muses do to inspire the practice of the arts. What Manet has done then is to contemporize the subject, to show it completely in terms of modern Paris life, with the men dressed in the fashions of the time. The setting looks like it could be a park in Paris. The big Bois de Boulogne comes to mind. Additionally, Manet has drawn on poses from another earlier work of art, which I show you here on the right-hand side. And this is a this is a print by Marc Antonio Raimondi, which is based on a drawing by Raphael, another Renaissance work of art. What the print depicts is the Judgment of Paris And that's going on over here. Paris having to decide which of these three mythological goddesses is the most beautiful. Hera, Athena, or Venus. Venus wins the prize, the apple. But notice down here in the lower right-hand corner, there are three seated figures, and these poses are used with very little change in the painting of Le Déjeuner sur l'herbe, the meal on the grass, or the picnic by Manet. Additionally, this pose by Raphael draws fairly directly on Michelangelo's posing of Adam on the Sistine Chapel ceiling. One leg is lying flat across the ground, the other leg raised up, the arm in this case resting on the knee. And if we go back to Raphael's use of that pose, you can see he inverts it, he reverses it, and the arm is more upright, lifted, and active. But otherwise, the pose is essentially the same. So Manet is drawing on at least three earlier works of art, but he's transforming them in clever ways. First, by restating the imagery in utterly contemporary terms. And if we draw a comparison then between Manet's technique and that of the Renaissance work, as he no doubt intended us to do, we see that his technique is new in many ways. For example, whereas these figures in the print and those in Titian's painting are very subtly modeled in light and shadow to convey the illusion of a three-dimensional form in the landscape, Manet almost eliminates modeling altogether. We see a little bit of shading on the lower side of the leg. Otherwise, we see areas of dark shading, just small areas of dark shading that separate one bodily form from another, the arm from the shoulder, or the neck area, the breast from the arm, the leg from the stomach. That's about it. The brushwork is also a variable. It is fairly finished and detailed in the foreground, where we see a still life motif. It is painterly and sketchy in the background. So in these ways, Manet is calling our attention to a new technique, a new way of depicting figures in the landscape that makes the painting less an illusion through a window into depth and more an arrangement of marks on a flat surface. He calls our attention to what a painting is. It may be an illusion, it may not be, as the painter wishes to participate in that convention or not. Another reference to Renaissance art is in the triangle of figures. You'll recall that Michelangelo's Pietà or Raphael's Madonna in the Meadow both present us a triangular grouping of figures. And we see much the same here. But this is a triangle that is ambiguous and unstable because one of the figures is in the distance. And she looks a bit like she's been kind of flipped up into the air by the thumb of the figure in the foreground. The space here is thus somewhat ambiguous. Is this figure, well, how far is she in the distance? A little hard to tell, a little hard to determine with any sort of precision. Unlike, say, the tree or the distant landscape forms here, which clearly, unambiguously appear to be in the distance. Now, Manet submitted this painting to the Salon in 1863, and the work was rejected. But that year, the jury was very conservative and rejected, I think, more than half of the thousands of works that were submitted. The artists who had submitted these works, so many of them, 800 of them, were rejected, and they complained loudly. Their complaints reached the ears of the emperor, who is said to have himself taken a look at some of the rejected works and decided, well, they weren't so bad. Why not hold a salon des refusés, an alternative salon of the rejected works? And the artists whose paintings had been turned away could participate if they wished. I think about 40 of the 80 artists participated. And this exhibition was held directly adjacent to, just simply through a doorway from the official exhibition. It was seen by many, many viewers who came out to um, in many cases, laugh and to ridicule the rejected works. And so Manet's painting acquired a great deal of notoriety. By the way, this is a large painting that would draw attention to itself by its size. Um, the provocative nature of the subject attracted their attention and their ridicule. Um, and this made Manet something of the man of the moment, much talked about, much in the public eye. Well, this exhibition is important because it represents yet um, another break in the attempt of the government to control the practice of art through a jury. Um, the jury attempting to control the development of artistic style, to put a sort of break on innovation and to allow only those works that it approved of to be seen. Um, and this is a trend um, that harkens back to Courbet's private exhibition, and we'll see continue in other private independent exhibitions, which lead ultimately to the acquisition of expressive freedom, of creative freedom, and financial freedom on the part of the artists of the time. Following closely upon this work is another somewhat similar effort by Manet, which we see here, and this is entitled, this is entitled Olympia. It was painted between 1863 and 1865. And if the audience did not perceive Manet's clever variations on earlier works of art in La Déjeuner sur l'Herbe, he made it a good bit easier here in his painting of Olympia, which is based very clearly, very transparently on Titian's Venus of Urbino. This painting was in the Uffizi in Florence. Manet had been there, he had made studies of it, and you can see that his borrowings from it are very clear. Well, especially in the recumbent female nude, seen in the foreground, head on the left-hand side, feet on the right. The sleeping lapdog in the Titian painting is replaced with a very alert, alive cat with its tail in the air and its eyes looking out at us. The two serving women in the middle ground of Titian's painting are replaced by a black serving woman who holds a bouquet that apparently has been delivered here by a male admirer of the figure of Olympia, who it was assumed was a prostitute, a courtesan, um, and additionally, the background of Titian's painting, which very cleverly distinguishes between foreground, middle ground, and the distance, each zone tucked within the other zone. Manet has flattened all that out in the background, so we have two different wall coverings divided by a stripe. And you notice where the curtain edge leads directly down to the hand, unself-consciously covering her sexual center, her genitals. Manet has included the same thing in the form of the stripe, but it's moved a little apart from the hand. And here the hand quite consciously covers her genital area, so that she is aware of the viewer and seems to be a little standoffish, to resist the viewer's gaze, at least in a fairly modest way. All right, so again, Manet is drawing our attention to his clever paraphrasing of an earlier work of art by restating what's here in contemporary terms. Viewers would recognize this, or would assume this to be a scene from a brothel, perhaps, or the apartment of a well-kept woman. Again, the painting is provocative in subject matter. And Manet invites us then, prompts us to draw comparisons between the Renaissance style with its modeling, its very subtle modeling of the figure so that she looks like a round form in space, to his almost total elimination of modeling. It's as if she is lit by a flashbulb that has gone off and has created the kind of strong light and dark contrast that we see here with sheet and um, the throw and the body in the variation of white hues in the foreground seen against the dark background. Particularly in the floral bouquet, if I can get closer to that, you'll see that it is painted in a kind of a patchy technique, um, a sketchy technique of blobs of color, and not the refined um, hidden brushwork of conventional painting. Uh, Olympia, a name, by the way, that was the common pseudonym nickname of a prostitute in mid-19th century Paris. This draws on a long tradition of painting the recumbent nude, and I'll show you a couple other examples. Here, of course, is, you should recognize Ingres' Grande Odalisque, a figure, Odalisque, remember, is a Turkish harem woman. So the nudity here, the sexual moral implications that one might draw from that was more acceptable because this was given to somebody from another time and a place. The contemporary Parisian viewer could look down on what's seen here, could judge it in a negative way because it was not the way Parisians behaved. Um, one might assume, but the social moral behavior of somebody from a faraway place. Likewise, this painting by Cabanel was much celebrated at the Salon of 1865, purchased by the government, but the title here is Birth of Venus. So the nudity, the sexual connotations that are on display is located in the figure of Venus and not in contemporary Parisian life, as Manet has done. Manet has done. Excuse me. The painting was accepted in the Salon of 1865. It was put on display. Of course, it was very controversial, appreciated by some artists and critics, and denigrated by others. But the work would have a strong influence in its manner of painting, especially on the artists we identify with the Impressionist group. Now, Manet is often regarded as the first modern artist, and modernism here has two meanings. It's modern in the sense that the subject matter is contemporary. It's drawn from not mythology, not from literature, not from the Bible, but from the contemporary life that surrounded the artist, that viewers would recognize as their own time and place. And secondly, modern in the sense that these paintings draw attention to what a painting is, what a painting does. They are not so much illusions, an illusionistic view through a window into distant space, but rather marks arranged on a flat surface, which may be more or less illusionistic depending upon the artist's technique, the choices made by the artist. So, for example, the flowers, as I pointed out, are very much rendered in a patchy technique that calls our attention to the fact that this is a painting and not an illusion. These are marks arranged on a flat surface that calls attention to the very nature of what a painting is. Other parts of the painting are more illusionistic. All right, let us move ahead now to, I'm going to show you a different image group. And we'll go directly to the painters that are identified with Impressionism. We're looking here again at Manet's Déjeuner sur l'herbe, and I want to contrast this with Monet's painting of the same subject. These names, of course, are very close to one another. Edouard Manet, Claude Monet. Don't get them mixed up. Uh, Monet was younger than Manet by about 10 years. Now, on the right-hand side, this is an early effort by Monet, who wanted to paint a large figural work of the sort that would draw attention by its very size to him and to his talent as a young painter. We might think of Courbet's Burial at Ornans and the way that depicts a genre subject on a large scale, on a scale so large that one couldn't help but notice it, and as happened for Courbet. Monet, admiring the work of Manet, decided he would paint the same subject. But rather than make a lot of references to the art of the past, he would paint a picnic, a meal on the grass, as such an activity was really enjoyed by young Parisians of his class. And so he's posed here, I think about 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 men. That is including the man here behind the tree, and 5 women. And they're very much dressed in contemporary attire, and they are enjoying a time of social interaction, eating and drinking in the woods outside of Paris. And this was a common phenomenon of the time. People worked generally 6 days a week, but Sundays they had off, if not Saturday. And it was commonplace for middle-class Parisians to get on the train or to take their carriage if they had one, to go out into the countryside, maybe 10 miles away, and to stroll, surrounded by nature, to enjoy a picnic, maybe to have a meal in a country restaurant, to boat, to canoe, to swim in the waters. And I'll show you a number of views of this very activity. We might regard this as a kind of modern fête gallant. And so I show you here again Watteau's painting of the Pilgrimage to Cythera, where where a number of people in contemporary attire in the early 18th century are enjoying their company, their amorous interaction in the landscape. But you recall that there are references here to mythology in the Harem of Venus, that is a focal point on the right-hand side of the painting, in the little putti who are gliding through the air above a boat. So the references to mythology have been eliminated by Monet, and what he shows us instead is an actual social phenomenon of the time, in the dress of the time. It was common for people to cater a meal, and we see the caterer back here who is sitting behind the basket from which all the food has presumably been taken, been delivered. The figures were modeled by a painter friend of Monet, whose name was Basile, a very tall, thin man in stature. You can see that his attire is varied from image to image. This person is different model. And the women were all modeled by Monet's mistress, later wife, wearing different dresses. And you'll notice that the poses are very natural. In one case, she covers her face as she adjusts her hat. The poses are actually drawn from fashion illustrations of the time. Dressmakers seeking to create a market for their works, which were produced in greater abundance, sought to publish and to distribute prints of new fashions, of variations in dresses, so as to create a wider interest in their products. And Manet has drawn on those illustrations, which show us the details of the dresses really quite clearly. he painted this study. This is a study for the intended final work out of doors. And it really does seem to capture the experience of sunlight coming through the leaves and forming complex patterns of light and shadow on the ground, on the dresses. The colors are bright and vibrant. Now what happened is Monet wanted to paint a final version of this work that would have been 24 feet in width, a painting on the scale of a barrel at Ornat. He couldn't paint that in the open air, on plein air, on site, but he had to do it uh, adjacent to an inn where he was staying under a cover that would protect the painting. He had to go up and down a ladder to paint the upper parts of the canvas that was so large. He fell, he sprained his ankle. He was unable to complete the painting and had to roll it up and leave it behind as security. When he was able to reclaim it from the inn many years later, it had mildewed and it had to be cut into pieces. Only one piece survives, and here we see that piece. It's really an incomplete painting. You'll see that a lot of the areas here, for example, the dress is unfinished, and other areas are just kind of roughed in big fields of color to which detail would presumably have been applied. So while this painting was never exhibited, never finished, I show it to you because it was an ambitious project that indicates the interests of Monet, the direction that he wanted to apply his art. That is, painting contemporary subject matter, no references to the art of the past, and to paint these scenes insofar as possible out of doors, in the light, before the subject, and to record his immediate experience of what he saw. That intention is evident here in a landscape which is entitled Quai du Louvre, also by Monet, and this dates from 1867. A quay is a wharf or an embankment along a body of water. So we're seeing the Seine River flow through the middle of the painting, and we see the embankment along the Seine, which is directly adjacent to the Louvre, the former royal palace, now an art museum. Whereas earlier painters had gone to the Louvre, Delacroix did this, Géricault did this, to study the art of the old masters that was on view there, to make copies and thereby learn the lessons that those paintings had to offer. Monet had virtually no interest in the art of the past, and instead went to the Louvre to make use of the balconies as a vantage point from which to look out across the city of Paris and to record matter-of-factly what he saw, as this painting does. We can identify all the buildings, well, at least the major ones. This is the Church of Sainte Geneviève, also known as the Pantheon, the Dome of Val de Grace, the steeple of Saint Etienne du Mont, the statue of Henry IV, and of course the Seine and the Pont Neuf Bridge. People are moving about. There's really, I suppose the dome is a focal point, but otherwise this is a kind of matter-of-fact record with a frame of the painting containing what just happens to fall within it that shows the daily life, the movement through the city of Paris. So Monet was strongly committed to painting en plein air, a phrase that means out of doors, in the open air, and to an effort to recording in a kind of naive, straightforward way what his eye perceived, the optical experience that he had of this place, of this scene. I'll show you a couple other views that indicate this same intention. This is a painting called La Grandlière, a phrase which means the froggery or the frog pond. You can see it, the title down here. And it refers to a place in the countryside, a few miles outside of the center of Paris, where, like Monet's Déjeuner sur l'Air, people went on a day of leisure to swim. We see that going on over here, to relax, to interact, to rent a boat and paddle about the Seine, to have a meal or a drink, as people are presumably doing over here under the cover within this pavilion. The painting was made en plein air. In fact, we know that Renoir had his easel set up directly adjacent to Monet's. He painted the same scene. They're a little different because Renoir was interested more in the people, and Renoir was not so gifted, in my opinion, at recording the ephemeral play of light on the water, as Monet has captured here, really quite virtuosically. But we can also see that this is the painting. It has a sketch-like appearance. The brushstrokes are quite evident in his attempt to work quickly and record what he saw. Now, Monet in the late 60s, 1860s, regarded images such as this as sketches. And he probably had the intention of perhaps developing this into a larger, more finished work. But his attitude toward an effort like this began to change in the late 1860s, early 70s, such that he came to regard an image like this as complete, as self-sufficient. It did not need to be further developed. It did not need to be finished in the studio. This was a complete painting. And so this is an important development. What had formerly been regarded as a sketch, something made on site to capture effects of light and movement that were changing rapidly, came to be regarded as a self-sufficient painting, as a complete work, and need not be labeled a sketch were it to be exhibited within the salon or an alternative exhibition. Now, Monet was so committed to painting en plein air that he would do it in all seasons, in all kinds of weather, all conditions. And let me go ahead and show you this work here, which illustrates that point. It's called The Magpie, or in French, La Pie, referring to the bird that rests on the gate here. This is a painting made in winter, as you can see. So the conditions were challenging. It must have been cold out for so much snow to be still in place. It's known that Monet, in order to carry out a painting in these conditions, would take wine bottles full of hot water onto the site with him, so that when his fingers begin to chill and to become stiff and awkward to use, then he would grasp a wine bottle, pull that hot water, and hold it for a while to restore circulation to his fingers. He also has recorded here some surprising effects, such as the silvery blue color of the shadows. And this is the result of responding naively, straightforwardly to what his eye sees, rather than adhering to the convention that shadows were an absence of color and painting them with gray areas. Really a beautiful work. And to go back to this work I skipped over, this is called the Railway Bridge at Argenteuil. This was a city outside of Paris, a village, I should say, small city village, about 10 miles away, where he lived for a number of years because it was much less expensive than being in Paris, although one could get on the train and be in Paris in just a short amount of time. And it was a place surrounded by countryside where people came to boat, to swim, to stroll, to have a meal. Now, we don't see that going on here, but rather we see the railway bridge and a train crossing it at this very instant. So this is an image of modernity. Railway bridges of this kind, of this construction, and trains were a relatively new phenomenon in the French landscape. And what Monet has recorded is very much an ephemeral sight, something changing. The train will be gone in an instant, and the smoke that it belches into the air will dissipate and disappear soon as well. So both in subject matter and in the moment that is captured, this is an image of contemporaneity, of transience. And you'll notice that the technique is painterly throughout. We can see him using a variety of brush strokes, little fleck-like, comma-like strokes that record the play of light on the water. Similar strokes for the texture of the foliage, and very different strokes for the straight lines of the bridge and the curvaceous blobs of smoke that come into the air from the smokestack of the engine. All this is done quite lightly. You can even see what seems to be bare canvas showing through in an area like this. Um, so this is an image of modern experience and of optical experience, of what the eye sees, painted on plein air. Now, Monet and his contemporaries, and that would include Renoir and Degas and Pissarro and Sisley, artists whose work we'll be looking at more later. They began talking um, in the late 1860s about an alternative exhibition, alternative to the Salon, because their success at getting their works accepted and exhibited at the Salon was highly variable. Um, One of these artists might submit 2 or 3 works, and one would be accepted, the others rejected. Or their works might be accepted one year and then rejected the next year. The makeup of the jury was always changing year to year. And so it was difficult to, if not impossible, to guess what the jury would approve of, what they would accept. They came to regard the jury as capricious, unpredictable. And so rather than submit their works to the judgments of the jury and be disappointed year after year after year, they began talking about an alternative exhibition, one they would set up on their own. Doing this was delayed by the Franco-Prussian War, which took place between 1870 and 71. They talked then about the idea and finally mounted the first exhibition in 1874. We see here the cover page of the catalog of the exhibition. And at the top, it tells us that the artists identified themselves as the Anonymous Society of Painters, Sculptors, and Printmakers. In other words, they avoided the name that might be made fun of, might be the subject of ridicule. They've got a name here that sounds like a business. And the catalog further tells us that the first exposition of their art took place in 1874 at this address on the Boulevard des Capucines. This was the catalog. The catalog itself was available for 50 cents, and the price of entry to the exhibition was 1 franc, that is twice that amount, and the exhibition took place between the 15th of April and the 15th of May, and the open hours were 10 in the morning until 6, and then again 8 until 10 in the evening. Well, this was a bold effort on their part. 30 artists participated, 30 artists. There was a range of style among the works of those artists. Some of them were very much progressive, forward-looking, innovative artists, such as Monet, and others were more conservative. They exhibited 165 paintings. And one of the paintings was this work by Manet, which was entitled Impression Sunrise. You can see the painting dates from 1872. It was displayed then in 1874 at that first exhibition. This especially is a painting that would formerly have been labeled a sketch. It records the rise of the sun above the French harbor of Le Havre, the town that Monet had grown up in, at the mouth of the Seine River. And we all know that the appearance of the world changes very quickly as the sun rises, as more and more light comes into the sky. And it looks like Monet has worked at breakneck speed to record reflections on the water with a lot of quick painterly marks. Likewise, shadows in the form of darker marks. A couple small boats with figures in them rendered in one color as silhouettes. Uh, the sky looks like it has been brushed on broadly, very quickly. And really every mark is visible as a painted mark applied to a flat surface, the flat surface of the canvas. And yet this was not labeled a sketch, but simply displayed with the title Impression Sunrise. Uh, when I talk to you about the labeling of the group, we'll come back and talk about this again. I'll show you a few other works that were exhibited to give you some idea of the range of art on view. This painting by Pizarro was exhibited. It's called Hoarfrost, and it refers to the layer of white frost that covers the ground. Um, the, uh, the subject is of the countryside. A single peasant figure has a load of sticks, presumably gathered for firewood, on his back. You can see that the ground is broken up by furrows, but also by shadows that are cast by trees that must be behind the, the point of view here, the point of view of the artist. And these shadows, they're bluish in color, uh, stretch across the ground. This is a subject that Courbet and his contemporaries, Rousseau would be one name, maybe even Corot would have painted. It's in keeping with the nature of realism, and it's in a preference there for agricultural peasant subjects. But done here, probably painted on plein air and in the brighter colors of Impressionism. Another painting by Manet, and this is called Boulevard des Capucines. Um, it is it records the urban landscape in the vicinity of the exhibition, and probably this was executed from the very site of the exhibition, which was a recently vacated studio of the photographer Nadar. He moved on to another location. The Impressionists used the site. And it seems that we're looking from a second or third story window at the street outside, as seen in winter with the trees devoid of leaves, kind of a gray, dull day it is. Um, and the phenomena of pedestrians and carriages moving about are what Monet records here. You'll notice that the figures are painted with maybe single strokes, a couple strokes, just roughed in a very sketchy manner, which a critic seeing this would label black tongue licking. The pink, bits of pink you see here, these are presumably the balloons which are offered for sale by a salesman standing below. Here, a landscape by Cézanne called The House of the Hanged Man. That would seem to refer to this house where some sort of tragic incident must have occurred, and the house acquired that nickname. You'll notice that Cézanne uses the same colors that we saw in the Pizarro painting. His technique is a little different, and the result is forms that look a little more substantial, more weighty than those by Monet. And then one other work, here a work by Renoir, painted in 1874 and called La Loge. And what we see here is both a portrait of a woman seen at close range at about waist length, but she's also engaged in a leisure activity, and that is attending a performance at a theater. This might be between acts or perhaps before the performance was to begin. She's holding opera glasses, but she pauses to look at us. She is attractively dressed in what are probably the latest fashions of the time. She seems to be caught in a casual moment and maybe not really posing. The man behind her is looking through glasses at other people in attendance, perhaps at other women in other boxes that surround the theater stage. So these last 5 or 6 works were all exhibited at the first Impressionist exhibition. The Renoir here, A Loge, it's called, the box. The Cézanne, House of the Hanged Man. Monet's Boulevard des Capucines. Pizarro's Hoarfrost. And then Manet's Impression Sunrise as well. In a subsequent um, video, I'll go on to talk then about the further development of Impressionism. But this exhibition in 1874 was the first of 8 Impressionist exhibitions, as they later came to be called, which took place between 1874 and 1886. And through those exhibitions, we see the artistic efforts of this avant-garde group.